Good morning. Welcome to DRPT's Commuter Assistance Program Grant Workshop. Next slide. There you go. So I know there's some folks trickling in, but we're going to get started now. All of you are in listen-only mode, so you'll hear us. You'll see some of our faces as we're talking, but we will take breaks periodically at different points to answer the questions. At any time, and we encourage you to do this, at any time you have a question, there is in the little panel questions section for you to ask questions of us. We will get to all those questions and we'll break periodically to answer them, but you can submit them at any time. Also, when we take these breaks, if you don't want to type in your question, you can use the raise your hand function and we will unmute you so you can actually talk to us and tell us what your question is. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted on DRPT's website and I think also on our YouTube page. All right, next slide. So today we're going to talk about the Commuter Assistance Program grant program and also to tie to it the special projects grants. These are opportunities for agencies throughout the Commonwealth to get funding for their commuter assistance programs and other programs in the Commonwealth. The transit workshop for transit projects and capital and transit operating, that is tomorrow. So if you're a transit agency on this call, hopefully you've signed up for that webinar also. We've got several things to cover in the Commuter Assistance Program grant program, and you'll hear from several DRPT employees that will discuss this. And like I said, there's plenty of time to answer your questions, so please feel free to put questions in that question box. Okay, next. So just a little quick overview of the funding. So the funding for the Commuter Assistance Grant Program comes from the special projects funding that DRPT basically by law, by legislation, we take 3% of the mass transit fund and we reserve that for our special projects. And in that special projects program is the Commuter Assistance Program. So it's lumped in with all of that. We don't know exactly how much that is until we get the budget numbers. We don't have the budget numbers just yet, but usually it falls around $6 to maybe $8 million total. But again, it covers the CAP program and it covers all these other special programs that now I'm going to introduce Tiffany Dubinsky, who's our statewide transit planning manager, and she's going to tell you about the other non-CAP special projects. Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Chris. As you said, I'm Tiffany Dubinsky. I'm a statewide transit planning manager with DRPT, and I am our project lead on all of our special programs. Next slide. Under the special programs umbrella, we have 3 different grant programs, and so I'll cover details on each of those programs for your information. Just as an overview, first is our Workforce Development Grant Program. This is a rebrand of our public transportation intern program that we have had for years, and I'll explain the rebrand in just a moment. And then, of course, there's our Technical Assistance Grant Program and our Demonstration Project Assistance Program. Next slide. So with our Workforce Development Grant Program, we found that in the past that a lot of our grant recipients were a little confused about what were eligible activities or positions that could be utilized under the intern program. Typically, intern program has been associated more with planning, scheduling, office desk positions, but in general, our intern program had always been available for also operator training, certifications, mechanics, any kind of facet of the public transportation field. And so we rebranded the name of the program to represent more of a holistic approach to what we're looking at in terms of supporting training and development of staff and skills within public transportation. So workforce development supports hiring of what we're calling apprentices, which I know is not exactly the similar term to intern, but it should be a larger title to understand for anyone interested in pursuing careers in public transportation. So as I mentioned, that could be an internship in doing planning and scheduling, but also sometimes it could be in operations. So if you wanted to help develop in terms of mechanics, operators, dispatchers, even supervisors. The main things to note about this program is that our match rate is 80% state, 20% local. We do set a flat rate per hour for interns, and we are specific that this cannot be in replacement of a full-time position. So this is supposed to be geared towards an internship, so anything that's roughly less than 40 hours per week. Eligible applicants, those can be our standard transit agencies, local governments, and of course our commuter assistance program operators. So you are also eligible to apply under this program. Eligible expenses, in addition to your wage, fringe benefits, training, we do mention that you can also include certifications and then travel, which is all outlined in our grant application manual or blue book. Next slide, please. And how we evaluate applications, we ask that in terms of overall submission for this program, that there's a submitted quarterly report to the assigned DRPT program manager that would typically coincide with a reimbursement that you may submit for the the apprenticeship in this case. We also ask that the participant submits a written report following the conclusion of their apprenticeship, just so that we know that what kind of experiences they have, the feedback they can provide to the transit agency, or in this case for you all, commuter assistance program. And then also to make sure that they have some takeaways that can help them either continue pursuing a career in public transportation or into any other field that they may end up having interest in. We don't want to lock anyone in, but we do want to make sure that there's a value in their participation. Main things to note is that we want to make sure that there is a work plan. So if you have an idea of the timeline, the major milestones or work that they would accomplish, we need that as part of the application. Next slide. Moving on to technical assistance, this is the one I believe that a lot of people are familiar with under our special programs. This one is supporting variety of planning related activities. So that's your typical studies, feasibility plans, corridor studies, any technical evaluations. In particular, we do see a lot of our grant recipients for any kind of transit development plans, transit strategic plans, or in this case for you all, your commuter assistance program strategic plan, or CAPS. So if there's any agency that is due for an update or any of these kind of planned requirements, we encourage you to apply through our technical assistance program for any kind of funding assistance. The match rate is 50% state, 50% local, and eligible applicants are the same. So that's transit agencies, local governments, public service corporations, PDCs are for planning district commissions, MPOs for metropolitan planning organizations, human service agencies, and of course, commuter assistance programs. In general, any of these planning related activities must clearly demonstrate how any of these resources or activities will benefit transit or public transportation. So of course, we're not going to fund something that is going to be for just purely economic development. There needs to be a tie to public transportation. Next slide. We introduced back in fiscal year 21 scoring rubric in order to have a better transparency of how we evaluate applications. But in general, for minimum requirements, we ask that there is a clear scope of work. So if there's an outline of all the major tasks that are related to your planning activity, luckily, if you're looking at a CAP strategic plan, those guidelines are already provided for you. So we ask that you make sure that you include that in your application so that we also have a tie to the timeline that you anticipate it takes to be able to complete your study or your project, as well as the cost that is involved in terms of your request. Next slide. Last, we always wanted to mention about our demonstration project assistance program. This may not be as highly utilized because of the nature of it, but this is a program that has been geared towards supporting and incentivizing either the implementation of new transit services or to test innovative or more non-traditional public transportation solutions. And I'll explain that in just a moment. In general, we wanted to be able to provide this program as a way to reduce the financial risk of kind of testing out some of these new transit services or technology innovation products that have been coming out in the past few years, as well as helping to fill the funding gaps in terms of local, regional, or even if there were some federal funds tied to a project in order to help see how these projects can better help the Commonwealth as well as transit in general. Usually we see with demonstration projects about a 12 to 18 month time frame for implementation. That includes a few months in the beginning for kind of any planning, simulation to make sure that whether it is a new service or if you're testing a proof of concept, that everything is going to be able to operate within the service parameters that you have defined. And then, of course, towards the end, we ask for a lessons learned white paper product so that we can also share what your experiences were from the demonstration project to other agencies that may be thinking of doing something similar in the future. As I mentioned, match rate is 80% state, 20% local, so this is different from the other two special programs. And then eligible applicants are narrowed more towards actual operators, but we do see a lot of public-private partnerships, so don't be deterred by it if you aren't listed as an eligible applicant. We encourage you to come and reach out to any of your DRPT contacts and be able to kind of discuss your ideas. Next slide. As I mentioned before, there are two different types of projects that go under demonstration. One is new service, and that's kind of what you would associate, whether it's like a new fixed route, new express route, new commuter route, anything that is kind of a typical new transit service that we are familiar with. It is key that this is not a way to help replace discontinued routes, so whether it was because of a reduction in funding or if it was because of low ridership and you wanted to kind of revive it, this is not what we utilize demonstration funds for. It is also not eligible for any kind of transit service that could be eligible for funding through some of our other state and federal programs. The key point is that it's for areas or markets that are not currently served or additional areas that would be more like an expansion of service where there isn't currently any coverage provided. The other part is something that, the other type is innovation and technology, and that's the other test of proof of concept. So that can be anything from connected and automated vehicles to driver assistance systems, and that includes like pedestrian collision avoidance systems. Also, we're seeing a lot more interest in terms of mobility services, which is like microtransit, first mile, last mile connections, utilizing mobile applications for a variety of reasons. So that would be this where type 2 would help support projects if you were testing something like that within your service area. So when we say proof of concept, it can't be something that we know has already been vetted and it's already out there, saturated in the market. So, whether it's like automated vehicle locators or computer-aided dispatch, we already know that technology is out there and that there's a reliable number of vendors, so we wouldn't support that under this. If there are questions about an idea, some sort of technology that has come out, because the landscape is rapidly developing, please feel free to also reach out to myself or any of your DRPT contacts, and we'd be glad to be able to discuss that with you. Next slide. And last, just to kind of understand what goes into the application and the scoring for demonstration projects, we want to make sure that when you were applying, by the time you apply, that the project is ready to go if you are awarded July 1st. So 1 is the project readiness, 2 is the eligibility. We do encourage as a natural pipeline that if there is a proof of concept or an idea for new service, that you actually do some initial planning, and that is where we encourage people to apply through technical assistance if you don't have the resources to do that yourself. That is also something that we encourage through all of our major planning efforts, so whether it's your transit development plan, transit strategic plan, or your CAP strategic plan, those elements should identify some of these projects so that you have a better idea of the scope of work when you're looking at a demonstration grant. And of course, the last part is a local or regional commitment. We understand that sometimes projects like this under demonstration can be in the millions of dollars. So we want to make sure that there's a commitment from your local and regional partners to see the project, at least the demonstration through, and have a commitment that if proven successful, that they will work to find a way to fold it into regular operations. So those are our 3 special programs that I wanted to make sure to highlight. These programs are definitely seeing an uptick in interest year to year, especially the technical assistance programs, because of all the planning activities that we encourage our grantees to accomplish. But if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer that now, or you could feel free to reach out to me at a later date. But with that, I'll go ahead and hand that back over to Chris.
Thank you, Tiffany. There was a question, but actually you answered it. So
Okay.
if anyone, I don't see any additional questions and I don't see any hands raised. So again, if you think of something, you can ask questions at any time, and if we can't answer them now, we will get back to you for sure. All right. As you can see, so again, thank you, Tiffany. That was very good. So as you can see, there are some opportunities for community assistance program type of projects in the special programs projects, particularly technical assistance and the workforce development. So take a look at those if you have some things you need. Now we're going to talk about the community assistance program. Okay, next slide. So the Commuter Assistance Program consists of two separate grant programs. One is CAP Operating Assistance, and the other one is Project Assistance. And both of those is a 80-20 funding ratio. That means you have a 20% local match for all these CAP programs. Okay, next. And for all the community assistance program grant programs, whether it's operating or project, these are the main things that we want to see. This is the main purpose of this grant program, is to mitigate traffic congestion, reduce single occupancy vehicle trips or SOVs, reduce miles traveled, and really we want to see, how you do all that, right? We increase the use of transit, van pooling, and carpooling. Okay, next slide. So there are three parts to all of our CAP grants applications. There is the online part. So those of you who have submitted grants through DRPT before, Olga, right? The online grant administration system that we have. So there is an Olga application online. So you need to complete that part. That's going to provide just general basic information about, the name of the program or the project, the description of what you're going to do with the funding, the purpose of it, budget information, a lot of budget detail in Olga, contact information. That's kind of in the Olga part, but that really doesn't get enough information for us to understand fully what you're actually going to be doing. So years ago we created what we call the supplemental application, and there's a different supplemental application, and we'll talk in detail about those throughout during this presentation. But there is one supplemental application for CAP operating, and then there's three actually for the CAP project, depending on what type of project you have. And all of those supplemental applications you will find in Olga that you can download and use those applications. And you want to make sure that you're using the correct one, because that will help us with your application review. And like I said, the supplemental application just provides a lot more detail about what you're going to be doing with the grant, what your program does, how you're going to spend the money. It's just a lot more details in there. It's an Adobe form type of version. We want you to keep it in Adobe Forms. You don't need any special Adobe products. You could fill out the application in Adobe Reader. But if you do have any issues with filling out your supplemental application, by all means, call your DRPT program manager. We will help you out. But keep it in that format. Don't try to change it. Don't try to convert it to Word or some other thing. It will mess up our whole review process, and forms and things won't line up right when we kind of review the information. But you do need to submit that supplemental application. You will attach it to your Olga application, and before you submit it, and then submit. And your application is not complete unless we actually get a supplemental application. And so more details about that and a lot of the other things, and all the other things that we're going to discuss in this webinar, are in what we call the Blue Book. It's the Transit and Commuter Assistance Grant Applications Manual. That will be available soon on Olga for you to download. But again, if you're having troubles with Olga, just reach out to us. Okay, next. All right, just a little bit about, we'll go more details, specific grant applications further on the webinar, but just a little brief information about the general process that we take to review, evaluate, and score applications. So an application for actually for all of them doesn't just go through one person at DRPT, it's multiple reviews. So you'll have an initial program manager that will review the application, evaluate the application, score the application, and then there's a second reviewer that's doing the same thing, a different person. And then what we do is, as teams, as groups, we make recommendations on, like the commuter assistance programs as a whole, will make recommendations on what we feel should be funding and the funding amounts, and that will go through another review process, usually at the division chief level, and then finally at the executive level, when we're putting together our 6-year improvement program. So there's a lot of folks that are looking at it, and I say that, one, to make sure that you understand it's not just one person making a decision here. We've got some checks and balances here, but also, you're familiar with some of us here at DRPT. Don't write it with that in mind, that, oh, this person knows us, they know what we do, we get a grant, pretty regularly, so we don't have to put a lot of detail in. Yes, we want you to put a lot of detail. We want you to write the application for someone that has no clue what your project program is and what you do. So just keep that in mind. There is specific scoring, as Tiffany showed, for each of the special projects. There was a scoring matrix. There is one for all our applications too in the community assistance program. We will go into detail on those. Generally, kind of, how does DRPT make a determination? Well, we're going to look at if it's a smart investment for the Commonwealth. Is this going to, again, going back to an earlier slide on those goals and objectives of the community assistance program, is it meeting one or more of those goals? And doing it effectively, efficiently, not with not out of our budget, basically. And then again, are you meeting those goals? And then through the process, again, we want you to provide as much detail about how you're spending the funding, what you're going to do with that money, what the results or outcomes are going to be in your grant application, in the supplemental application. But as you know, if you've been through this before, we will reach out to you from time to time during our review process to get more clarification, to maybe get more information. We understand we're all busy, but it is a busy time of year for DRPT, so please respond to those requests for more information. We're doing it just because we just need that information to better understand your application and better explain it to, as you said, the other people reviewing things on down the line. So that's just a little briefing. We'll get more details about scoring later on. Okay, next. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Moline, who's one of our commuter programs managers at DRPT, and she's going to talk about the CAP Operating Assistance Grant Program. Kathy?
Good morning, everyone. I'm, of course, struggling with my webcam. There we go. It should be hopefully coming up soon. Good morning, everyone. I am Kathy Moline. I am, as Chris said, one of the commuter program managers. So I'm going to go over the operating assistant application and just to do an overview of some of the new things that we've added this year. So as most of you know, we fund operations of existing CAP programs, and if you are interested in starting a new one, please call Chris Gabe or I, and we'll be able to help you with that. Next slide. As most of you know, TDM covers a broad range of projects and strategies that are too numerous to list. So this is just a brief overview of examples of the programs that are eligible for the operating grant. So operations, ride matching services, website phone numbers, guaranteed emergency ride home, marketing and promotion of carpooling, vanpooling, and transit. Next slide. As Chris mentioned, the purpose of the programs, the main goal and objective for our programs is shifting SOV trips to carpool, vanpool, and transit, as well as increasing the number of commuters in the ride matching databases. And this is Commute VA or the Commuter Connections databases. Next slide. As we all know, COVID changed a lot of things for us. We're now working in hybrid operations. And as you are working on your application, please adapt your program to reflect these changes. And we'd like it to be a little more strategic with your marketing to the current conditions. Next slide, please. So a portion of the scoring criteria for the application is your program description. So this is, as Chris mentioned, done in Olga. And what we need is we need a complete description of what the funds are going to be spent on and how, what services are provided and how the public receives these services, what activities will occur, what operational systems will be used and how will they be used. Next slide. So this is an example of a program description, and it does tell us what the funds will be spent on, what services will be provided, and how the program will serve the public and what activities will occur. Next slide. Program justification, this again is a scoring criteria, also done in Olga, and this is an example of program justification. And what we want is, what's the purpose of your program? What problem does your program solve? And how your program will be is connected to your agency or regional plans. Next slide. So this is what you will find on your supplemental application. You will have room to fill each of these out. So I'm going to talk about each one of these briefly and let you know what exactly we'll be looking for, and hopefully it'll help you as you work on your application. So the first part is service area. We need to know what is your geographic area that your program covers. Some of you may cover crossover borders with other PDCs or other programs. So what we need is you to list the counties, the cities, the towns, corridors that fall in your program service area. For public access to the program, this we'd like you to list your website, your phone number, and the email that the public uses to access your program. For goals and objectives, what we need to know is the goal for the number of new applicants entered, and they're either entered by your program staff or directly by the commuter into the ride matching database for ride matching. We don't want you to include numbers for those who are in there for incentives or rewards. And with this one, there is an opportunity to list other goals and objectives for the program. For program operations, it covers ride matching, follow-up, and database maintenance. This section is intended to expand on the program description that you filled out in Olga. And we need more detail on the operations of your program. So for operations, what we want is your program and staff. What will they do? What will they do to implement your program? And what are you focused on? What will be done with your grant funding and how your grant funds will be used? For the ride matching, what ride matching system do you use, and what system is used by program and staff, and how is it used by the program staff and the public? Follow up with commuters. Last year we got a wide variety of how this is done, but here we want you to describe how ride matching applicants and customers are followed up with. How commuters will be contacted, how often they're contacted, what questions are asked when you do contact them, and what information do you provide to them. For database maintenance, how is the database maintained? How and when are commuters removed? What is the decision process for removing or keeping commuters in your database? For marketing and measurement, we do have a new spreadsheet, and I'll go over that in a few minutes. But we will be looking for the basics that we had last year. And like I say, I'll show you our spreadsheet in a few moments. For promotional events, you will fill this information out again on the new spreadsheet. But this, we want to know, we want you to list the number of people expected to visit your program at a table or a booth. A lot of you do events. How many promotional items are you expected to provide to the public at each event? Just a little more basic information on promotional events. For guaranteed ride home or emergency ride home program, if you operate a program through your CAP operating, we need you to include the expenses for the operation and administration of the program and describe the expenses that will be charged to the grant. We don't want you to include any marketing or promotion of the GRH or ERH program in this section. Enter the operating and promotion in the marketing spreadsheet. And there is additional program component and information box for you to fill out for that. For program staff and contractors, please enter all the names and position titles of your organization's staff that will work on this program. And we want you to include the percentage of the total annual salary or wages, the total amount of the positions that are being charged to the program, as well as a detailed summary of each position's work on the program. Also, a part of this is if there is an increase in salary and wages or indirect costs from your FY23 application, we need you to provide a justification for the increase. For contractor work, we want you to provide information on the work that will be done by each contractor, and if you do have the name of the contractor, to include that as well. For the financial statement, this will be a separate attachment to your supplemental application. So we need a separate document of your program's FY22 final expenses and revenues. And we want you to show the actual total expenses by line item for the CAP program in FY22, but also include a crosswalk to show which budget categories in the financial statement go with the budget categories in the CAP contract. What we mean by that is each and every one of you have a different reporting for your reimbursements, and some of your categories do not have the same names as the line items we do in the CAP program. Next slide. So as I mentioned, one of the questions that we want to know is we want you to describe how ride matching applicants are followed up with. This is an example of how they're followed up with, and we feel this is a really important part of your program, your operations. So this is an example from one of our grant recipients last year, and they follow up by phone 1 month and then 6 months after the inquiry. They gather information on the person's commute mode, and then they use that information to give to the person to help them make their ride choice. And they are also offered additional information if needed. And you know, within 6 months, as we all know, something could have changed from when their initial visit to your website. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there is a new marketing spreadsheet, and I do want to throw some thanks out there to a couple grant recipients last year who developed this for themselves, and it was not only helpful and better for them as they did their application, but it was really helpful for us when we were actually scoring their grant application. So it worked better for them and better for us. Next slide, please. So I hope you can read this all okay. Excuse me. So this is just a little sample of it, and the headings, all the headings on there are all the headings that we had on our application last year. There are categories, and the first one you see here, and I'm just showing a few lines of it. The first category that will be on the spreadsheet is ongoing and recurring campaigns. Then there's marketing campaigns and initiatives. There's contests and challenges. And this is where we'd like you to list, because DRPT will continue to do marketing campaigns throughout the year like we did this year. We'll do Discover Transit or something similar to it again, Rideshare Month, which we just completed last month, and then also Bike Month. So in contests and challenges, you could list those three in there. And then we have promotional events, which I talked about a little bit earlier. So this is where we want you, again, to list on-site events that you will be attending, guesstimate the approximate number of people that you expect to visit the table or booth, and then approximately the number of promotion items that will be given away. So the first column is pretty much for the date. And what was put here is ongoing. So this is something that they do every month or every couple weeks even, is they do Facebook posts. And then the purpose. The purpose is to keep their followers engaged in the Rideshare Facebook page. I'm not going to go through all of them, but target audience. Who are you trying to reach out to? And specific messaging. What is the messaging that you're going to put out there for them? Next slide. So in this, this is the rest of the spreadsheet. There's a call to action. For the call to action, it's really important is for us is what do you want your audience to do? That's what we want in the call to action section. The materials and advertising media. This one in particular, they were doing digital posts, graphic and text. How will their marketing items be created? A lot of you do in-house stuff. A lot of you use DRPT's marketing stuff that is created. Ad placement. Where are you going to put the ad? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it a newspaper? And what's the approximate cost? How much is it going to cost you to do a Google ad or something like that? One of the most important things that we want you to think about as you put the spreadsheet together is how will each marketing campaign be measured for success? What metric are you using to evaluate your success? We really want you to think about what makes this a success for you. And then for contests and challenges at the end, some of you do prizes, some of you do not. A lot of you will use either Commuter Connections or Agilmont or Commute VA's prizes each month. Next slide. One of the things that that we notice every year is we need a little more detail about your budget, but not just that. We don't want you to add your local match in as a funding source or any part of the budget tab in Olga. Olga will automatically calculate that for you. In this example, we'll look at dues and subscription. And as you see, this is a list of dues that are actually broken out for us. And the amount entered into Olga was $2,000. But if you add those up, it's actually $2,375. So we find this every once in a while where it's not added up, and it does change your bottom line. It can change your line items. So just be aware that, make sure that it all adds up. Next slide. This is a sample from last year that we looked at. This one is broken out beautifully. It adds up. It lists every little thing that the grantee was going to do and when they were going to do it, or not when, but you know, how they were going to spend the money. So this is what we're looking for when you do your budget detail in Olga. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about scoring. You know, the most, you know, the important things are program description and your purpose and justification. So, excuse me. So I'm just going to go down through each of the categories real quickly. All this information is in the Blue Book, so don't feel you have to write it down. But I'm just going to touch on them real quickly. Is the program part of an adopted plan? You know, it's imperative that your CAP program activities and services are backed throughout thorough planning and will increase the likelihood of success of your program. Program description, we're looking for, it depends on whether the description of the program is complete and clearly shows how and what your funds will be spent on, what services are you providing, what activities will occur, how the program will serve the public, the operational systems used, and how they are used. So that'll be in your program description. Marketing and attendance, or excuse me, marketing and audience description. Your score depends on how well the audiences for marketing are defined, the details of the expected marketing activities, including outreach activities, advertising mediums, advertising placements, and timeline. And all of those you'll find in that spreadsheet. The measurement for success, that's a column in the spreadsheet. Successful marketing relies on the ability to measure if each marketing campaign or advertisement achieved the desired results, and which ad did better than the others. It's really important when you do an ad is to look at that and see, oh, that ad, you know, this ad did really great, and we did it this day, and you know, and then if you did the same ad a different time and they didn't do as well, why? So it's important for you to look at the why for marketing access as well. Strategy for increasing ride matching requests. We need you to convince the public to use the ride matching system to seek their commute options. So the scoring depends on how well the program will increase the number of commuters seeking ride matching, if and how ride matching applicants are followed up with, how commuter database will be maintained, and the trend of ride matching requests. For milestones and event descriptions, again, this is in the spreadsheet. These should contain detailed milestone events, other activities important to the operation of the program, and more details provided, the better the score, of course. Staff level and work tasks, I went over that a little bit. These are evaluated and scored based on staffing charges and the work tasks of all staff charged to the program. Budget detail, a well-detailed description of all the expenses is crucial to the evaluation of scoring on your application. It depends on the proper use of expense categories and details of each and every expense within that expense category. Your cost effectiveness reflects on the efficient program that achieves maximum results with minimum costs for operating. So we're looking at your ride matching requests, your SOVs reduced, your VMT reduced, and the program costs to achieve those results will be considered for this score. Next slide. So in addition to your scoring criteria, we also evaluate trends. So we do evaluate the trend of the number of ride matching requests you receive, the SOV reductions, VMT reductions, and the cost effective, the trend to achieve these reductions in ride match requests. We are also looking at the recent history of your ability to administrate grants, which includes the timeliness of reimbursement requests, current open and executed grants, and the timeliness and accuracy of reporting to DRPT. Next slide. So we're going to take a little break here if we have any questions.
Yeah, Kathy, thanks a lot. We do have a few questions. One clarification I'm going to put in there, and then I'll answer one of the questions, and Kathy, I'll post the others to you. So one of the things just to point out, the milestones and events, actually, you don't put that in that spreadsheet. It's in Olga. So Olga has a section where you put in your milestones and events. We want to see some detail there, not just we start and end. So that's where that is. And then one other thing, everyone, or we got a question on. So this recording and the slides will be posted. There'll be either a link through the DRPT website or directly on Olga, so you'll get all that information. So Kathy, we do have a few questions for you. Let me just let these going. So Kathy, so your question is, so if we're only setting goals for ride match requests, how do we or can we address goal setting for promoting transit?
That's a good question. I would actually look in, depending on which ride matching system you use. If you use Commute VA, Agile Mile, you can actually go into the reports and actually run a transit report. If you are, say you're going to do a push for transit for, we just concluded Discover Transit in September. You can go into the system, and I apologize, I don't know how. Go ahead.
Kathy, I think the question is more about how do they do goal setting for promoting transit?
I can't answer that.
let me just answer that for you. So yeah, we definitely want to have a ride matching, how many ride matches you're doing, for the next year as a goal. You can add to that, you can put in your own goals and objectives, but specifically for things like transit, for promoting transit or promoting anything else. So as Kathy mentioned, there's that new marketing spreadsheet that you're filling out rather than filling out through the supplemental application. And there is a part in that spreadsheet. It's like, what's the goal? What do you want to do? What's your outcome you want from the promotion? So you could put it into the marketing spreadsheet, but then you can also add goals in the supplemental application if you want to address it that way too.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, Kathy, you're welcome. Let's see. In the goals and objectives item, you said only enter those attempted matches inquiries, but not people for incentives and rewards. Can you elaborate on this distinction?
So what we have some people that actually are in the databases that don't track their trips, but they have to track their trips to get their rewards. But we don't want to count those who just get incentives. It's important to us to count the people that do rideshare inquiries, not just those that go in and sign up for rewards. I don't know that they can do that with Agile Mile without recording their miles. I'm not sure how Commuter Connection works with their rewards. Does that?
Yeah. I think the point Kathy's making is that the important thing to us is how many people are finding their commute options, how many people are getting matches, because that's people who you're potentially changing behavior. We all know that people can grab incentives and rewards for doing the same thing they've always done. So if they're already a transit rider, they qualify, they can qualify for incentives. But getting matches and rewards are separate, and so there is that distinction. So Kathy, good answer for that. Couple more questions for you, Kathy. Do you have the ability to remove commuters from Agile Mile database for maintenance?
I believe you can go in there. If you were on the training that Bailey did, I think you can go in where the you can see all the members, and I think you can delete that. Delete a member that way. Also, you can, of course, reach out to us, and we can send a note to Agile Miles to remove them. Agile Mile is really good about catching things, so I'm not, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure how Commuter Connections does their system.
Okay, and finally, one last question for you, Kathy, and this is this should be an easy one. Actually, you're going to cover this later, but when does the application process begin?
December 1st.
There you go. And we'll have more key dates towards the end of the presentation. Okay, that's all the questions I see in the question panel. Again, keep putting questions in there as we go, or if we didn't fully answer your question, please, respond, and you will provide some more detail for that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to CAP project assistance. This is the second of the 2 grant programs within the overall commuter assistance program. And Gabe Ortiz, our Northern Virginia Commuter Programs Manager, is going to talk about the CAP project assistance grant. Take it away, Gabe.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so I'm going to be covering the different projects that are related to the CAP project assistance. And I'm going to caveat my portion of this by saying Kathy went over a lot and a lot of really good detail, and a lot of what she said will kind of apply to these grants. Some of it is just kind of fundamental for each project. So I'm going to try to not belabor those same points and go over them. Of course, if you guys need clarification or questions, feel free to ask. But I'm going to try my best to just kind of point out the differences between the grants and sign up some of the points of emphasis for these specific projects. So right here you have an overview. This is essentially the purpose and kind of the foundation for all 3 projects that we'll be going over that fall underneath the CAP project assistance. I think one good thing to remember is just all activities, all expenses, everything you do and everything you put into your application should go back and really be geared to supporting what you see here. These are kind of fundamental across the board for all our projects. So you'll see this a lot, but really kind of, again, the foundation of what we're doing with these projects. Next slide. Again, something Kathy went over. The one thing I want to point out is in terms of eligible applicants, and the difference is Vanpool providers are eligible for CAP project assistance, and obviously that would be for the Vanpool portion of this. So that is the kind of biggest difference between this and the CAP operating, and of course everything else remains the same in terms of the local match and what we'll be providing for the rest of the match. And nothing else different except that Vanpool providers are eligible for this, and we encourage to any Vanpool providers, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on board, and just wanted to point that out as the one difference. Next match or next slide. So these are eligible projects. You essentially have 3 avenues you can go here. You can do a general project, CAP project. Anything related to employers would have to be part of the employer trip reduction, and I'll go into that in more detail. And Kathy will go into the Vanpool portion of this. Again, one thing I want to point out is, in the past we've had a lot of success working with transit agencies, and we want to make sure that any transit agencies on the call, or any that any of the participants might know of, that you can pass this on to. Want to make sure that they are aware that we are here to work with them, and again that we've had some success in the past working with various projects. So again, similar to the Vanpool providers, we'd love to bring on transit agencies and take on any projects that they might have. Of course, everything does have to go back to that initial slide I said with the overview and those kind of tenets that we have for this grant. And of course, anything that is going to be funded with this grant has to have a measurable reduction in SOV trips. So that's always going to be the key there. And then a quick note on Vanpooling, and Kathy, like I said, we'll go over this in more detail, but don't think that you have to be stuck with that advanced say, advanced start model for Vanpooling. If you have other ideas, or if you have other kind of models that you would want to use, you're open to do that. I would suggest maybe even something like what's being done on the 66TMP. It's a very clean, very easy to understand model. We can talk more about that if you're interested, and obviously they have their website and you can go check that out, but just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are 3 applications supplemental applications you can download for underneath the CAP project assistance. One I'll kind of just refer to as general CAP project, and that's really just everything that's not employer related or VAMPL related. So in a lot of cases, I have a feeling these are going to be somewhat newer kind of projects or ideas that you have that that you want to fund, and actually what we're trying to avoid are funding ideas. I probably shouldn't have said that. So that's my next point. So if you do have something that does fall out of the realm of employer trip reduction or VAMPL, it's really critical that you have something that's very fleshed out. We want to see projects that again aren't based on just an idea or something anecdotal, or so we need really specific, really well thought out plans to show us what you want to do. So again, we'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but anything that's going to fall outside of those 2 other categories, one, I would really suggest you talk to us prior to submitting the application. I think this time in November will be a great time to do that. But 2, when you start going down that road of filling out the application, make sure that it is, again, it's a very clear and well spelled out idea, or I'm sorry, project that you want to fund. Next slide. So one of the things that Kathy had gone over in a lot of detail, and I'm going to talk to this specifically for, again, sticking to the general CAP project applications that you would be filling out, or if you're interested in filling out. These are going to be really critical. They're important overall, but more so because, again, what I'm thinking is when we see a general CAP application, it'll be something outside of the realm of what's typically done by your program. Or you might be supplementing something. So whatever it is, I think that the key here is to, again, clearly tell us how it's going to operate, how it's going to work. But then more than anything, I think for the project justification, I'm going to kind of go back to what Kathy said is what is the problem and how is the problem going to be solved? So it'd be really important for you to let us know why this application is going to be solving a very specific existing problem that exists in your service area. Next slide. Thank you. So the scoring, just harping again on what's important here, which obviously project description and project description purpose, we will be looking at those closely for any of the general applications we receive. It won't go over the other categories in too much detail because we've already done that. But I would say when applying for a general project, the first 2 categories here, the project description and project description purpose, will be instrumental in getting this funded. If you do see a need and you do plan to fund some kind of marketing communications activity, the marketing spreadsheet would apply, and everything that Kathy talked about and what needs to be done there should be followed and adhered to. Of course, just make sure you pay attention to everything here, but with an emphasis on these first 2 categories that you see in the table. Next slide. So we're wrapping up the general project and now going into a couple of the specific projects here. The first one I'll be discussing is employer trip reduction project. So this is exactly what it was last year, except we called it employer services. I think the change for the name was just to make this more specific to what we want to get done with this grant. And we thought this name change kind of put an emphasis on where we think the focus of the grant should be. So really anything related to employees and employers need to use this supplemental application. And here you see kind of some of the goals that we have, some of the outcomes that we have, and on the next slide we'll go into some more detail with that. So really, this is the focus of your grant application when it comes to employers. All activities, again, need to lead back to this, need to tell us how this is going to be fulfilled. You know, for us, we here at DRPT and really, you know, across the region, we feel you really can't fulfill these three kind of objectives or goals, if you will, without direct sales and some kind of proactive outreach. So it's important that that's somehow reflected in your application and on all the parts where you need to kind of discuss that, and you'll have a few opportunities to do that in the supplemental application. Make sure that comes out very clear. You know, what that looks like is up to you, but of course, you know, there's those tried and true kind of methods, whether it's picking up the phone, sending out emails, obviously being really diligent without follow-up, you know, we don't necessarily have to see those, but obviously those are really, you know, again, those are strategies that have worked, strategies that, you know, if you're going to do something besides that, it has to, again, be direct outreach. It has to be something proactive. Social media posts just aren't going to do it, right? I mean, those nobody knows who's looking at those. You can get an idea, but we don't think they're going to really move the dial in terms of getting employers to sign up for transit benefits and really do all those previous goals that we had or that you see here actually. Next slide. One thing that we're asking all program or applicants to do and eventual grantees for this grant is to categorize their employees with these levels. This can be downloaded on Olga if you don't know. And it's basically a way for us to classify employees and then also give yourself a way to have a baseline. You know, we won't go over each level because as you can see, there's a lot of different criteria for each one. But I mean, just keep in mind, you know, as you go through level 1, and eventually I'll show the other next 2 levels in the next slide. You know, what you see is an increase in engagement by employers and kind of increase in investment of what they're doing. So with level 3 and level 4, you see here, obviously this is where we want to end up at the end of the year. If you started level 1, level 2, the goal is to get everybody into these levels and move them through. To ultimately be providing what you see here. And again, that just doesn't happen on its own. You got to do, I'm sure many of you know, a lot of hand-holding. You know, throughout the year, you all will run into your point of contacts leaving, and I know how frustrating that can be, and that's why follow-up is so important and keeping lines of communication open. I mean, we do see this really as kind of a sales type grant. So by that, you know, you're selling these employers on trying to get them to provide what you see here in these levels. So any questions you have with these, let us know. But that's going to be the key here. And then for employer, in terms of the scoring criteria, again, a lot of it is similar to what Kathy went over, but I will point out that if you see right kind of in the middle of the table, the sales operations category, one we will be highlighting, if you will, when we review your applications. You know, what are your applications telling us that fulfill your sales operations? And again, we never want to be too prescriptive with this. You know your capabilities best. You know your resources best. Nobody knows your service area better than you and the employers you're dealing with. But you know, at the end of the day, we do want to see, again, really proactive efforts and really plans that are going to say, yeah, we're going out and we're reaching out to these employers and getting them really to convince them to do this. Sometimes it'll be easy, sometimes it'll be hard, but yeah, sales operations is one that we really want to focus on here. Make sure you pay close attention to that as you fill out your supplemental application. And then in closing with employer trip reduction, again, points of emphasis. This is a sales focused project. We do want to see how you will be reaching out to employers. It's going to be critical for your application to get funded. And really at the end of the day, you know, we want employers to be offering high levels of transit benefit. And our thinking for that is if you can get an employer to do that, they're really set up and really committed to helping you reach your goal as a grantee. If they can get, you know, whether it's as simple as pre-tax, which is a great start, or all the way through offering some kind of incentive, that means you've really done a great job with this employer, and they're really committed to getting their employees to get to the job site without having to drive. So that's why we kind of want to end it on that note. Why, you know, you'll hear us talk about transit benefits ad nauseum almost. You know, we kind of think that's the gold standard of what you want to achieve with an employer. So yeah, oh, one more slide. So supplemental application. Few things I wanted to highlight here as well. You know, service area. What we want to avoid is seeing, you know, your service area being the entire county or the entire city. You know, show us that you've done a little due diligence in that you do have, you know, specific areas you want to reach and specific type of employers you want to reach, whether that's, you know, 100 or above, or a certain industry that you really know you can hone in on. So make sure you do take the time to not just put a blanket statement like the entire city or the entire county when you're doing the service area. Program operation, this will be one of those opportunities where you can really tell us how you're going to, you know, get those 10 points for the sales operations criteria. This is where a lot of that will come from. And then direct outreach to employers, again, another opportunity to kind of, this is the nuts and bolts of how you're going to reach out to employers, how you're going to get those 10 points for sales operations. So really that kind of goes hand in hand with program operations. It's just more kind of the specifics when it comes to the sales portion of this. And now Kathy will walk you through Vanpool projects.
Hey, Gabe and Kathy, before we get to that, Gabe, you've got a question about the employer levels.
Sure.
So someone asked about the employer levels, like, so I guess just explain like where we got those levels from. The question was when was the last time they were updated, but I think it's probably good to just explain where we got those levels and why we're using those levels.
The levels were taken from Commuter Connections, the MWCOG up here in Northern Virginia, the Council of Governments. They had devised them sometime. Chris, you might actually know the origins of those better than I do in terms of when they were devised or when they were kind of developed. But we did essentially borrow it from them. And we just feel that it's a great way to kind of supplement what you're doing and for us to kind of like build a baseline, and then we can see kind of the progression of what you do with employers. So in other words, if you started off with 10 level 1 employers, which, you know, for the most part aren't really doing too much, and then by the end of the year you converted, you know, 5 of those into level 3 and 2 of those into level 4, you know, it helps us kind of gauge where you're going, and obviously it helps you gauge where you're going. Puts us kind of all in terms of the state, kind of gets us all kind of on the same page. So really it's in a way a bit of a scorecard to help us see where you're going as a program and what progress you're having with your employers. So kind of I don't know if I left anything out there. In terms of it has not been updated. We think it's a pretty thorough list. If you look at it, there's a lot there. And there's a lot of opportunity for each, you know, salesperson and each employer to move through each kind of level, because they do, you know, it's very varying between each levels, and there's a lot that, you know, one employer can do to kind of progress through all the different levels.
Yeah, so just since I've been around a lot longer than anyone, I guess, but so COG years ago did a study. They hired consultants to come in and kind of formulate those levels, and if you see on the levels sheet that that it'll say about what your percentage of trip reduction is going to be based on that. So that was based on a lot of survey data and some work by some consultants to kind of come up with that sort of general estimate of, you know, if the employer is doing these things, you can expect this amount of trip reduction. If they're doing this. So it was all backed by some, you know, TDM consultants who came in and worked on that for COG. Gabe, a couple more things so we don't just, before we jump into the Vanpool stuff. So someone asked, they don't see capital bike share listed. Gabe, you want to explain about what we're doing as far as bike share things?
Okay, so they don't see it listed where, or I don't know. I guess you don't have that.
I think probably in the levels. I think that's what they're looking at. Bike share wasn't. And I think, Sarah, that's probably to your point of updating. So that's a good question as far as that's something we can go back to COG and ask if if there's a good percentage of bike share, or the employer's offering free bike sharing or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess in looking at the levels, Chris, I'm not sure if that would fall under kind of a general description of transit benefit as opposed to specifically to bike sharing. If it would get fit underneath like one of those category or one of those bullets there, that would be, not very specific to capital bike sharing, but something that has transit benefits related to it, like offering a transit benefit or offering some kind of, I'm not sure. We'd have to go look at that, but.
Yeah, it's a good question. We can reach out to COG. I'm thinking, one of the things, and maybe it's in the levels. Bike share is going to be a very small percentage of employees that's actually going to bike to work, and so it's not going to be as high as share or high as mode switched as a transit benefit. So, but yeah, just wondering how they account for some type of bike, incentive or something. We can find out more. There's a question about what's the right source of funding for a rural locality fund transit feasibility study. That would be technical assistance. That would be the technical that Tiffany Dubinsky talked about earlier. If you want to do a transit feasibility study, any type of study would be the technical assistance grant program. So definitely, if you have more questions about that, you can certainly reach out for specifics. Another question about transit benefits. So if the transit system fare is free, how do we count or measure that with these employer levels? Yeah, that's something that is not addressed in employer levels because it's a relatively new thing because of the pandemic. A lot of systems went free, and then some of those systems, they went free during the height of the pandemic for a number of reasons. One was they wanted, a lot of transit agencies went to backdoor boarding to try to keep the operators safer from the spread of COVID. And so there's no, as you know, there's no fare boxes usually in the back door. So it was free, but now some of those transit agencies are keeping it free. That's a good question about how that is. One of the things that gets done in employer measurement is surveying. So that's kind of the key. If you can get an employer, and we know surveying is difficult, right? Everyone's kind of over surveyed. But if you can get actual survey results with a good portion of an employer's employees actually completing the survey or getting an idea from their HR rep who does, who maybe has some information on how many people are getting to work by transit, that also helps in the measurement of trip reduction and how effective employer programs are. But it's a good question about the effect on free fares or fare free on measuring an employer trip reduction program. That's something we're going to have to work through. But yeah, employer surveys, if you can get enough participation from the employees, are kind of the more direct way of getting at that information. More questions. Lots of stuff on the levels, Gabe.
Okay.
So, well, here's a comment on the employer participation levels. Even with levels 3 and 4 employers, there's always room for improvement, educating, working through staff changes, and adjusting to new transit, etc. So I would agree that, yes, you're going to have turnover in any employer or organization. And so the idea, one of the things, with the employer trip reduction program is to have those employer contacts to make sure that someone there at the employer is constantly providing new employees with information about their travel options. So yes, good point. Let's see. What is an acceptable percentage of employees to survey participation ballpark? I don't know, Gabe. Do you recall? The higher the better.
I don't know. That's kind of I don't know if there's even like an industry standard for that. Like, that's tough to. I mean, I think one way we could go about that is see, like, let's say, like, what is acceptable to the counts, commuter connections, like what do they use? Because I'm sure whatever number they have, it's been established through some, years of surveying and kind of what they expect. But I mean, honestly, I think that would depend on the employer, the industry that the employer's in. I mean, I'm not sure if there's an actual number.
We might have to do some statistics and calculate that.
Yeah.
It could also be a good question for some consultants to kind of work out. It is, the thing with random surveys is that typically you don't need a high percentage of completions, but that's in a perfectly random. The question that we always had with surveys is there a survey bias? Are people who take transit more or less likely to complete the survey? Because maybe they're more likely because they want to keep their employer benefit, or they're less likely because they don't get an employer benefit. So those are the things we have to, you have to consider when doing that acceptable percentage that makes the survey statistically valid. And I'm sorry I don't have a number for you, but we can help figure that out. I think, again, as Gabe mentioned, we can talk to COG and their consultants. DRPD also has consultants we can use to find out more on that. But a very good question. Yeah, is 5% of the workforce, that if there are 100 employees, is that good enough or not? So
throughout the years, and Chris, I know you too. I mean, I've heard various numbers get thrown out there, whether it's 25% or 20% or whatever it is. What's my only thing is I don't know entirely what that's based on. So.
Right. All right. I think Gabe, I answered all those questions right now for what you were just talking about. Again, if you've got some more or we didn't completely answer your question, feel free to please put some more questions in the question box. But for right now, we're going to turn it back over to Kathy Moline to talk about the CAP project if you're doing an application for funding for a van pool project. Kathy.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So one of the key, or the key for any van pool project that we do is to increase the number of van pools and increase the number of riders in each van pool. I think it's important to note here that DRPT doesn't have the funding to support van pool operations like we do for transit operations. So the van pool program is, last year we had a lot of interest and questions about van pool projects from some of our senior management. And so we found that we needed to be creative, and with some guidance to sustain the project, we came up with a couple of new ideas. Next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is pay for performance. This is a performance-based project, and it's where DRPT would pay a fixed monthly payment for a certain amount. It could be for the number of each new van pool started. It could be even pay a certain amount for the number of each new van pool rider. So that is one of the ideas that we came up with for being creative to kind of re-jumpstart the van pool projects. Next slide. The other one that we are looking at is, again, we don't have the money for van pool operations, but this would be a good project to collect data, to get the information reported into the NTD, the National Transit Database. So some of the ideas that we had for this data collection and reporting project is, most transit agencies are reporting agencies already, and this would be a good opportunity to to have them report any van pool data for us into the NTD, and also tracking the monthly stipend payments for each van pool. Next slide. So if you're considering this this type of project here, it's important to understand that there is a 24-month lag between when data is reported in the NTD as to when federal funds could kick in. And your application, if you do apply for this, you would need to use additional funds would be used, and we need to know your funding source for this to continue it after the 24-month lag. We'd need to know, you know, where's the funding going, and where's the funding coming from, I guess. Next slide. The scoring criteria for the van pool projects is pretty much the same as the other ones. The project description, it must be complete and clearly shows how and what the funds will be spent on, what services are provided, activities that will occur, financial assistance and incentives. If applicable, we want to know detail on who will receive financial assistance, how they will learn that financial assistance is available, what the eligibility requirements are and the rules to receive the financial assistance, and assurance that there's no double dipping in the incentives or financial assistance. Performance measurement and reporting. This is a results-oriented grant project, and therefore applicants must show the how the results will be tracked and reported to DRPT. Staff level, the same. They're vital to the success and cost effectiveness of this project. The scoring is evaluated on staffing charges and work tasks. The budget detail, again, a well-defined budget on what each expense item category is to be used for. Cost effectiveness, it must be an efficient program that achieves maximum results with minimum costs. The number of van pools formed, new riders, number of van pools saved, and the cost to achieve these results. Next slide. Chris, are there any questions?
I don't see any questions at this point. Again, folks, if you think of questions, just keep putting them in the question box. But seeing none, we'll move over to Gabe, and Gabe's going to explain, just give you some more details of when you're putting in your budget, and Olga, what expense categories you should be using. Gabe? Yep,
great, thank you, Chris. Okay, so I'm going to go over what I think might be one of the more important parts of this whole process, and that's when you're filling out the budget and giving us all the details on what you're going to spend money on. So we have a document. We've used it it's updated for this year. The updated version will be available to you on Olga come December 1st. Hold on, maybe might be uploaded prior to that, but for sure for the open of the grant cycle. So it's really critical that everyone that's touching this grant, especially filling out the budget portion, at least look at this to use for guidance in terms of filling out the budget and knowing what expenses go where. Keep in mind the guidance document doesn't have every category that we have on there. So if there is an issue, if you come up against a question on where to put something, make sure you contact your program manager. What we did manage to do is get kind of some of the major categories in there that just about every program uses when doing this or filling out their budget. Next slide. So what I'm going to do is just go over some of the, again, major categories that for the most part everyone utilizes when they're filling out their budget, and just kind of go over some general points and tips for each one. everything I'm going to go over is because we have seen this happen, and not just seen it once or twice, but or with just one or two applications, but something we've seen across the board a lot for a few years now. So we just want to throw these out there as reminders, and again, a little guidance in terms of what you need to keep in mind when you're filling out this the budget portion in Olga. Salaries and wages. You know, it is exactly what it says it is. Just use it just for your staff time and what you've kind of calculated that there'll be you'll need in terms of salary. Do not include fringe benefits here or indirect costs. We will see that from time to time, so make sure that's not in there. So just keep in mind just salary and wages. Travel, obviously everything related to mileage, airfare, anything related to, you know, that what you're going to have to spend to get to your destination. What we don't want to see are registration fees for conferences, anything related to workshops that you're attending. Again, just the travel expenses needed to get to where you're going. Education and training. So this is where you want to put those fees. This is where you want to put those registration costs. Again, do not put anything related to travel. And then another note on education and training. Anything you do here, make sure that it's you know, there's no doubt that this is related to TDM. You know, obviously anything related to ACT is a good safe bet that you want to fund here, but make sure you kind of look ahead now. I know we put you guys in a situation where you're doing this a good 6 to sometimes 7 months before you know your year kicks off. So you know, make sure you look ahead to the next year if you can. To any opportunities and try to get those into your budget now, because they won't be allowed after the fact. So again, the education training, I guess the main takeaway here is also just don't include any cost for travel or related to the events or workshops that you'd be going to. Dues and subscriptions, for the Nova folks, this is where you would put your Commuter Connections membership. Really any membership related to Chamber of Commerce, or is there any organizations you're part of. Any software licensing fees would also go here, but you don't want to include expenses such as like a lease for copier or anything related to equipment. That's not what we want to see here. A few more items to go over, promotional items. It's important that you let us know why you're getting them. It's something else that you have to do your planning and kind of due diligence now, because we really want the promotion items to be obviously linked to something. In most cases, for all the programs, it's an events. That's where you're going to give this stuff out. So we want to know why you're ordering as much as you're ordering, and you know, obviously don't need really much detail on what it is, but really it's the justification on why you're getting these. We don't at this point want to have kind of just like a placeholder. Oh, well, you know, we might need these down the road sometime next year. We want to know exactly how they're going to be used and where they're going to be used. Obviously, you can't exceed the $5 per unit price for each item you're getting. So just make sure you give us those details for promotional items. Advertising and promotion media. I think the biggest thing we see here every year is our fees for graphic designers. I understand, you know, why this gets confusing sometimes, but just make sure that this is strictly just for ad placement, strictly just for what you do on social media in terms of you're going to be boosting things throughout the year, posts or what have you. Sponsorships also go here. So if you're going to be an event and you're going to be a sponsor, this is where you want to put those fees. Also, again, make sure you let us know the details on what you plan to be sponsoring. And event table booth fees also will go here. We do obviously see these as opportunities to get your program name out there, you know, these events that you attend. So that's why we think this is probably the best spot for those kind of expenses. And then professional services, so just contract hours only. And this is where you would put graphic design, billable like amounts and anything related to an outside, if you will, like, you know, third party that you're going to be working with. All their hours would go here. And next slide. And then a word on incentives. I think if there's one thing you take away from this slide is if you do plan on going the route of offering any kind of incentive this year, make sure you give us a heads up, your program manager a heads up well in advance. The November meetings are a good time to do this. If and I know with my grantees, I plan to carve out a portion of time to talk everything fiscal year 24. Kathy, I'm pretty sure you'll do the same or have some conversations. So this is the time, if you have an incentive or you have an idea that you wanna fund for 24, definitely give us a heads up first before you start going down the road of filling out the application. Couple things to keep in mind, and probably have this prepared for the conversations you're going to have with us if you do plan on doing this. First we want to say, if you're doing an incentive, we need to know why you're not using existing incentives and rewards. There are a few pretty good ones out there. Whether you're in Northern Virginia or other parts of the state, we need to know that you have looked into those, and we need to know why you're not using them. So we just don't want to keep flooding our area and the state with more stuff. It can get confusing. It also can be repetitive, and we don't want to create competition where there shouldn't be. So just make sure there is a strong justification for any new type of incentive or financial award you're going to be providing, and keep in mind, like, we want to know what gap is it filling, like how is it going to be, for the lack of a better term, better than what's already out there, or better suited for your needs. I think something else to keep in mind, we want to make sure that any incentive that you guys are proposing is going to require something from their participants, whether that is paying half of a membership to something, or filling out some kind of survey. But whatever it is, we want incentives to be active participants in this. We don't want everything kind of just handed to them. I don't think I need to explain to you guys why we feel that's kind of critical for any kind of incentive to be effective. We just think, when somebody has skin in the game with something, they're more apt to be kind of in tune with what's going on, and they're more apt to be, I guess, a little more loyal to what their, the program is or incentive that you have. So that should be a very key feature in anything you're proposing in terms of incentives. And this is something else that I think is important. Whatever incentive that you're doing, make sure within your application you build time to evaluate it. So we want to know how it did. So we don't think incentives should be year-long anyway. So there should be pretty concise, and just that magic number of 90 days to change a habit. Whatever the amount is. Obviously we don't want to see incentives that are running 10 months, 11 months, 12 months. One, because we think that's just too long, but two, also it doesn't give you any time to go back and evaluate and look at how your incentive did. And then obviously at the end, or really when you fill out an application and you are proposing some kind of incentive, we want to know, how is this going to fulfill the grant? How is it going to change travel behavior? So make sure that's a component of whatever incentive that you're doing. So keep in mind, like, also any incentive, we want to know what your idea of success is. So how did we know this incentive was successful at the end of the day? Or at least how can you measure that? Sometimes you try your best and something just doesn't work out the way it should. We've all been there, as program managers, but at the end of the day, we want to know why, and we want to know that you were able to clearly and concisely tell us, yeah, it was successful, or no, it wasn't successful because of this. So make sure that's up front and center in terms of any incentive that you're doing. That's it I have on that. I think now we're going to kind of wrap this up with some kind of more administrative stuff here. And I think, Kathy, is this your slides here?
Yep, this would be Kathy. I'm checking out, see any new questions. So Kathy, why don't you go ahead and
All right.
talk about how they apply and the key dates.
Okay. Next slide. So important things to know for the application: must-haves. You must have an Olga account with a master user established. If you do not have an Olga account, you can go to Olga's main page and set one up. And your agency must have a signed master agreement with DRPT before you can receive any a project agreement to implement the grant program. And also what we found last year is some people are using other people's Olga accounts. It's really important that you have your own account. Do check on what you have in our system for reporting folks. Next slide. So some of you may or may not know that DRPT, we did change our website. So you can find Olga under our grants programs. Under grant application resources, you'll see a little thing for Olga. Next slide. When you click on that, it will take you to what is Olga. And then if you click on the link to the Olga website, it'll take you into Olga. Thank you. So news and information, this is where you will find the Blue Book. We cannot stress enough to look at the Blue Book, especially when we explain what we're looking for in your application. It's really, really important. Next slide. When you click on the application schedule, this is where you will find the line item help document that Gabe talked about, the tier list for the employer trip reduction projects. The marketing spreadsheet will be here. Some of these documents are updated, but they just have not been uploaded into Olga yet. They will be uploaded by December 1st. Next slide, important dates. Someone asked about the dates. December 1st, applications are open in Olga. February 1st is the last day to submit your applications. However, if you're doing 5303, May 1st is the last day for submitting your application. February to April is when we review and do the SIP development. And again, as Chris mentioned earlier, Chris, Gabe, and I are not the only ones that review these. Our management staff, and we have to go and talk about your applications to them. So that's February to April. April, the SIP is presented to the CTB, the draft SIP. And then April and May, the SIP is on public hearings. This is where the public comment period is what we call it. And I believe DRPT does send out email notices that it is open for public comment, and I believe there's a link with that. So that's April, May. June, the final SIP is approved by the CTB, or I skipped the hearings, but June, the final SIP is approved by the CTB. June, July, we are developing and executing the grant agreements, and then July 1st, the funding begins. So the fun and the funding begins, I guess. Next slide. Here are the resources. Again, the Blue Book, the expense help document, employer participation levels, those are all in Olga. And don't be afraid to talk to us. If you want to send us your draft before you turn it in, please do so. Send it to either Gabe, Chris, or I, and we can look over the draft one before you hit submit, make any suggestions, stuff like that. Next slide. And here's our contact information. Please reach out to us with any questions. Again, Gabe had mentioned that our December meetings, we will, because November's still here, I guess, but November, December meetings, we're going to be talking about your applications, and if there's any questions you have when you started them and as you're going through them, we can we'll certainly help you with those. Next slide. That is it.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Gabe and Tiffany. I'm looking and I don't see any more questions, but I'll give a little recap, give you some chance to add a question, or again, if you don't want to enter your question, you want to ask it verbally, you can virtually raise your hand. There's a thing by your name, which looks like a little hand, and you can raise your hand, and we'll just unmute you and you can ask your question that way. So just recapping in a little bit. So as Kathy mentioned, we are scheduling, Kathy and Gabe are both trying to schedule meetings with everyone that are existing grant recipients to talk about their potential, their ideas or thoughts for grants for FY24. If they haven't done that, or if you don't want to wait, reach out. We will schedule something. If you're new, certainly reach out to one of us and we will be happy to talk to you about your ideas and thoughts. We don't want like big surprises and going, ooh, where'd this come from? They didn't talk to us about this and we have no idea what this is. As you could see from the timeline, it's not a really long time to review all of these applications. So that's why the importance of put details of what you're going to do with the funding in your grant application, your supplemental application, so that we know exactly what you're planning on doing. It helps us, review and measure it, and it saves us some time. I'm still checking the questions and no questions. So if there's no more questions, I don't see any. That's all we have to present. I know that we went over a lot, but again, we are going to post this recording. We'll post the slides. As Kathy mentioned, the supplemental applications and the help documents will be posted, the updated ones. If you go there now where Kathy showed you under application schedule and documentation, those are the last year's documents, so don't use those, but that is the location where we'll be updating all those supplemental applications, the help document for expense items. The new marketing spreadsheet will go there. Again, you'll need to complete that too for CAP operating. So all that will be updated before December 1st. The blue book, please read that, look through that. That's got some more details. But again, contact us if you've got any questions or thoughts you just want to run by us. So with that, I don't see any more questions. I will just thank you all for participating in DRPT's Commuter Assistance Program Grant Workshop, and have a great rest of your day. And we look forward to reading through your applications. Thank you.
Bye.